Hey everyone! It took me a while to decide on what kind of game I wanted to put out a video for on Christmas Eve, and I think I may have found just the right thing. After all, if people can think of Die Hard as a Christmas movie, then surely we could think of Parasite Eve as a Christmas game all the same. There's a lot to talk about with this title, as many tend to have pretty fond memories of it even now. So with that said, let's not waste any more time, and see just how well Parasite Eve for the PlayStation 1 holds up today. Mitochondria. That's the name of the game, figuratively. Released in March of 1998 in Japan and September of 1999 in the US, Parasite Eve is what's now known as an action role-playing game, as well as a survival horror. It was also Squaresoft's first M-rated game, leading to much interest in the title for that fact alone. It stars NYPD officer Aya Bree and her quest to solve the mystery behind, and consequently stop, a being known simply as Eve. The entire game is actually a sequel to what was an obscure horror novel of the same name. Getting into the specifics of the game's story could take a while, so I'll try to keep this description as simple and to the point as I can. Keep in mind that this is all happening in present time, or at least present time in 1998 on Christmas Eve. Aya attends an opera at Carnegie Hall, New York, with a really awkward blind date. Anyway, during a part of the performance by Melissa Pierce, things get out of control when literally everyone in the crowd begins to spontaneously combust. The only people not affected by this appear to be Aya and Melissa. As Aya gives chase, Melissa only has some cryptic words to give about Aya further developing her mitochondria. As the chase continues and more strange enemies begin to show themselves, Melissa undergoes one more horrible mutation and refers to herself as Eve going forward. It's here where the game's plot truly begins to open up, as Aya and her partner Daniel begin to learn more about the process of mitochondria, and eventually piece together the ways that it's shaped the events that have, and will happen if they cannot stop Eve in time. Saying that this game's plot and events are disturbing would be an understatement. While it doesn't hit you with over-the-top blood and gore, it does provide some very unsettling moments that are sure to stick with you long after you've witnessed them. I, for example, still can't get over the horrifying image of this concert crowd, who basically have their entire mitochondria altered until it's turned them all into a pool of orange slime. I mean, seriously, what the hell? I can't decide if I want to give these developers awards or put them away. Okay, I want to give them awards. The graphics will obviously look very blocky and dated to someone just giving this a try for the first time, but back in 1998, they were absolutely top of the line, and in my opinion, deserve to be remembered as such. Keep in mind, this game came out a few months after Resident Evil 2, and about a year before Final Fantasy VIII, putting it right in line with the quality of those titles. I honestly think that the FMV cutscenes still look amazing, even today. Backgrounds in the game are all pre-rendered, meaning that they are not part of the real-time movement of the game's characters or interactive objects and environments. Although they are not exactly what you'd call bright and colorful like in the Final Fantasy games, they more than get the job done, and still show some great moments of artistic creativity. I particularly enjoyed the layout of the museum, which had all kinds of interesting touches put in to keep it from feeling too boring or tedious. The soundtrack was put together by Yoko Shimomura. Chances are, if you're a hardcore fan of JRPGs, you've already heard some of her other compositions, as she's worked on countless games from the Kingdom Hearts series all the way down to Xenoblade Chronicles. As usual, her work shines here, as the soundtrack is rightly dark and ambient, perfectly encapsulating the tense mood and atmosphere that the game throws your way. The gameplay is also worth delving into, as it's still considered to be pretty unique even now. Instead of being 100% turn-based RPG or 100% action RPG, this game decided to form a hybrid between the two, making for a very interesting setup. During random battles, Aya has to wait for her active time bar to fill, as it would in any turn-based RPG, but during this time she's able to move anywhere that the screen, or shall we say the invisible barrier, will allow her to go. This enables her to dodge attacks while waiting for her turn to come up. During her turn, Aya can choose to use either an item, a special ability, a club for a melee weapon, or any of the game's various types of guns like handguns, shotguns, machine guns, rocket launchers, and plenty more. Unlike the previous phase, Aya cannot move while attacking, so you need to use each attack strategically. Just like Aya, the weapons all have their own stats as well, with things like their strength, number of bullets, and range of fire to look over. Her body armor also follows a similar concept, with stats to compare as you discover more of them throughout the game. But it doesn't stop there. Your weapons and armor can also be combined with others, using tools and super tools, in order to take the stat boosts and other enhancements and move them over, to create the ultimate equipment. This system took me a little time to adjust to, but once I began to grasp the concept, it quickly became like second nature to me. Aya's abilities range widely. Some of them revolve around healing, curing status ailments, or enhancing others, while some involve inflicting damage or status effects onto the enemy, including my favorite, Liberate, which feels like the equivalent of a Final Fantasy summon spell. These abilities are limited by what's called your PE meter. Although it will slowly recharge throughout the battles, you will still want to be sparing with it, as it can easily save you from difficult situations, but will begin to recharge slower and slower the more that you use it. Now that we've talked about the more familiar JRPG elements, let's delve into just what makes this setup so unique. Well, for starters, you have no additional party members throughout the entire game. It's just you and yourself at the helm, guiding Aya throughout each perilous location. Another major difference is, of course, the game's modern-day 1998 setting. Instead of being vast and fantastical, this game focuses on giving you something darker, grittier, and more realistic in New York City itself. There are no quote-unquote ultimate weapons or equipment to speak of, just the ones that you craft yourself with your tools and super tools. This allows for a surprising amount of freedom when customizing Aya's layout. Despite some environments having multiple paths and routes that you can take, the game is mostly linear in its execution. Outside of the game's world map, which is simply a matter of scrolling through and selecting which location you want to go to, there isn't much open-endedness to the places you can visit. I think the only major exception to this is the warehouse on Day 5, containing a new optional boss and special items you can only find there. There's one other exception, but I'll get to that later. Now I'll address the issues that some gamers will undoubtedly have with this title, as well as my personal thoughts on them. While the idea behind the combat itself is a fun and interesting one, it does have its share of flaws. For one, your space to move during combat varies with each fight. While some fights will put you in large, wide-open rooms, others will have you contained to very small spaces, as thin as a bridge or even the back of a small carriage. While these fights are far from impossible to survive, they are an enormous pain in the neck, and I won't try to pretend that I had any fun with them. Length is another topic. Most players will be able to complete this game in about 12 hours or less. For a JRPG, that's an extremely short length for a genre known to stretch playtime out to over 100 hours on occasion. Still, I didn't feel that this shorter length actually hindered the experience one bit, as I found the plot to have near perfect pacing throughout each chapter, and an adequate amount of time for each segment to breathe and stand out in its own ways. There are some that also believe the game does not have any real replay value to it, i.e. a reason to go back and play it again, but I beg to differ. After beating the game for the first time, you can use your completed save file to unlock what the game calls EX mode, which carries over your bonus points and the weapon and armor that you decided to nickname right before the game's final battle. On top of bringing these things along, the enemy encounters are tougher, and an entirely new area opens up during the game's second chapter, the Chrysler Building. Like the Bloody Palace mode, now considered a staple in the Devil May Cry series, this lets you climb a tower of 77 floors filled with enemies and a secret boss at the end. If that's not replayability, I don't know what is. I'd also just like to mention that I absolutely loved the character of Aya herself. Instead of focusing on a bunch of sex or gender-related stereotypes, Aya simply acts the way one would expect a member of the NYPD to act. She also doesn't wear any kind of flashy clothing or display any mannerisms that would distract you or take you out of the experience. It's honestly refreshing. I only wish this trend had continued with the game's 2 sequels. For what it's worth, the game was satisfying from beginning to end. I was completely engaged in the game's story, right up until the end, and found myself impressed by all of the different ways this title would manage to keep my attention. Heck, even the final fights took me for a loop, considering it all resulted in you having to run away, with the possibility of dying at any point in the segment. If more games felt as complete as this one did, I imagine we likely wouldn't even factor in gameplay length to our criteria as often. Outside of some outdated graphics, I believe this game stood the test of time, and is all the better for it. as more people begin to discover just what it is that Eve's been cooking up. While not a perfect game by any means, this one was, and frankly is, still an immediate standout. Between the modern-day setting, interesting protagonist and villain, fascinating scientific discussions, and mix of action and turn-based RPG gameplay, even with the outdated graphics, it's hard not to recommend this to any fans of the genre, as well as those who are looking for something a little more unique than your typical romp of protecting a crystal with a small group of bards. It was a fascinating little experiment, and one that ultimately paid off, in my opinion. Go check this one out yesterday. And that's going to be it from me. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on this game in the comments below, and I'll see you all again real soon. Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays to you all.